Thank you very much for the organizers to invite me here, and thank you for being willing to listen to what I have to say, even though I don't have really to say too much. The reasons for being invited here is probably partly because I'm an old hippie, and even though it's sort of becoming increasingly well, we are getting older and fewer of us, but I'm happy to see quite a few still hanging in here and contributing. The other thing is that, yes, I wanted to thank you, especially Morten, for providing. I don't have slides or anything, and so he has asked for a backdrop, and I mentioned these murmurations. You're probably aware of them. They're quite amazing. We don't really exactly know what they do. That's, I thought, a very fitting image for our topic. We don't really know exactly what we are doing. Some of them they have observed where many hundreds of thousands of birds do these things. And there's no leader, it just, this sort of happens. So thank you. I think this is a nice backdrop. The other reason I'm here is probably because I did this study, initiated with Franz Vollenweider, where we, on the one hand, looked at long-term meditators who take psilocybin. Probably just as important for me was the to get experience of how, finding different settings for psychedelic turning. It's most of it, like Franz has done all the trials that he did in clinical situations, and very few in Switzerland. I think it was the first one to do it outside of a clinical situation and in a group setting. It's to me that, and we continue in doing that. We continue to use Felsentor as a site for legal experiments, including compassionate use sessions. And maybe, at least for me, that seems, I feel like I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist. So I see myself more maybe like a storyteller, or maybe entertainer is too highly reached. But so I want you to relax most of all. There's nothing particularly that you have to remember, or nothing that you don't really know already. And if there's anything like that, you can read it up, and other people have said it probably more precisely, more. So just relax, and there's a lot of input that we get through the 3 days, which is wonderful, but also can be very tiring. Relax and enjoy. My Zen teacher, he was so relaxed that he more than once fell asleep during his own talk. So what I wanted, when I approached this talk, I thought, well, what do I have this unique opportunity of having an audience that listens to what I have to say. So I was wondering, what do I really want to share with you? What is important to me to share? And if I can share with you a little bit of the awe and wonder with you that life, that I'm struggling with myself to appreciate the wonders, and also maybe including, or definitely including, the confusion and the lostness in this life that we have. even a certain helplessness that we find ourselves in this situation. We all do, and we all struggle, and we can share this. And above all, I would hope to share with you some feeling of gratefulness. Gratefulness not for being happy, but actually more the way it works is actually if we manage to somehow come up with the feeling of gratefulness, we become happy. And there's so many things that we can, Brother David, my old Benedictine teacher and friend, every evening, he was now 89, he thinks of something today that was new, something that was inspiring, and there can be the color of a plastic bags on the street or something. We have to be creative in finding ways to appreciate. Anyway, the topic of today's talk is meditation and mind medicines or psychedelics. One way one can approach it is always the etymological use of words, and in meditation and in medicine, the med, the middle part, comes from ultimately from the Indo-Germanic root med, which means something like measuring out or exploring, staking out, walking in the seat of consciousness in the case of meditation. And psychedelic, the modern creation of the word, is making visible, showing, having access to the sphere of consciousness, the mind. So from an etymological point of view, these things are very similar. They come very close. And both are means to change our perspective. Both are means. Patanjali, the writer of the Yoga Sutras more than 2,500 years ago, mentions at the very first surah of the on the truth, he says, the siddhis, the wonderful states, happen spontaneously. They happen spontaneously, that we know. The second is already with the medical plants. So, and then there comes the tapas, the austerities. If you fast long enough, or if you do not sleep, you can come into these states. Or you have high fever, and then or mantras is the next one. And the very last is actually meditation. I was always thinking meditation is also obviously one of the technologies of consciousness. And the change, if it happens, if all goes well, we move from the illusion of a separate individual self or existence, to the reality of belonging to a network of relationships. We could also say we move from the mode of domination or controlling to serving the world, not to try to control or dominate the world, but try to serve the world from below. It's maybe a move from the I to the we. Maybe the next generation should be called a we phone rather than an iPhone. Meditation does this change usually in a calm, stable, quiet way, often slow and gradual. And psychedelics do that in a much more dramatic way, often a bit chaotic or overwhelming, unstable. And that may be one of the reasons why we old hippies were looking for other ways of getting there. And it seemed like these descriptions of the mystical traditions, in particularly Buddhism, appealed to us. Those old Zen monks who described their unbelievable experiences resonated with the experience we had on psychedelics. So that probably was one of the reasons why we we went and looked in those traditions what we could find. So we could ask the question, how can psychedelics help meditation? And well, as it was for me and my generation, it was a jump start. We first experienced these mystical states, and then we went to look what it is and what other people said about it and how to get there and so forth. Tricycle, the biggest Buddhist magazine in the English language, published it's a while ago a survey where they asked practicing Buddhists, seriously practicing Buddhists, hopefully playfully also, and 83% responded that they had psychedelic experience prior to their meditation experience. 83%, that's a lot. For others, it can be a refresher, like in that study that we mentioned. A lot of people had a lot of experience with meditation and ideally no or very little experience with psychedelics. And quite a few said that it renewed their original commitment, or it freshened up somebody like had begun to sew a Buddhist robe and then had put it away again. They picked it up again, the thread. So it's like a refresher. And another thing it can do, psychedelics, is showing us some blind spots that we can bypass our meditation, sort of maybe humbling the too self-assured when we think, I'm now an accomplished Zen, whatever, and I know it all. And then the psychedelic experience can shake that a little bit. I think in a formal meditation practice, maybe microdosing may be an interesting thing to experiment with. I know some people do. When it comes to high doses, usually the psychedelic takes over. The good intention of meditating in a formal way becomes sort of, though there are exceptions. Also in our study, we had 2 or 3 people who basically sat the whole thing in full lotus and just followed the regular schedule of a Zen retreat, like 30 minutes sitting, 10 minutes walking, 30 minutes sitting, and so forth. So, and there are other famous examples of like Trungpa or some other yogis also that highly developed that took a high dose of LSD, and basically, watching from the outside, nothing really happened. They just went about their daily business as usual. The other way around is we can ask, what can meditation do for psychedelic journeying? And obviously, that's a lot. We are working on the set, the mindset, when we do meditation. And in meditation, we learn sort of to usually we are so fascinated by the content or the object of our consciousness, of our thinking, that we forget that we are thinking, or that actually there is someone watching this or thinking this. And so in Zen we say we turn the light around and we shine our awareness on our own awareness. So that's a practice we can do, and once you get more used to that, when it happens then on a psychedelic journey, which is very dramatic, this can have a very reassuring effect. That was one of the things, you know, at the Johns Hopkins University, they did these dose-related mystical experience studies, very, very important, very deep and broad. And in the higher dosages, 60% had a mystical experience, but among those, about a third had reported confusion and fear, nothing lasting, but at least enough to be mentioned and to, well, in our study we didn't have any of that. I mean, unscientifically, none. I mean, there were some difficult passages, but nobody reported really any kind of confusion and fear. And so that has obviously something to do with these people were experienced long-term meditators. And the other thing that probably was equally important is that it was not in a clinic room in the 6th floor or something, but it was in a natural, very beautiful, natural setting in a temple, and we were already sitting several days, and we were sitting afterwards. We always had to compromise because it was a study. People had to go to MRI and so forth. But basically, it was embedded in a 5-day-long retreat and in a group setting, and that's obviously the way to go. I mean, so to me, this study in some ways very clearly showed, again, demonstrated the importance of the 3S, sacrament, what and in what dosage, set and setting, mindset and setting. I call them the 3 jewels of psychonauts, like we have the 3 jewels of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in the Buddhist world. Yes, Buddhism. Buddhism has 2 pillars on which it rests, and the one is the wisdom, and the other one is the compassion. Wisdom and compassion, and they keep them each other in a good balance, have to keep them in a good balance. Wisdom alone without compassion is somehow cold, or it lacks something, but only compassion without wisdom, it has no head, it doesn't know in which direction to go. So these 2 aspects are very important, and that's where I will lead over to the Julia Ratzwil, who is a biologist who I'm very happy that she agreed to say a few words. Maybe I start a quote with which we said as young hippies, that was again during the Vietnam War, make love not war, and we used to say, fighting for peace is like fucking for virginity. So, and I say this, we do experiments with other earthlings, with animals, in the hope to create a better world. If spiritual praxis has anything to say or to do, it has to create a more peaceful, a better world where there's less suffering and more joy. Otherwise, nothing makes sense. So, to me, this is that is central. That is very essential, and that's why we in this conference already several talks were referring to animal testing, which I understand has its place and sometimes probably necessary, but unavoidable, let's put it that way. But still, we have to reflect on it. At least we have to reflect on it. We have to think about it. In none of these mentioned there was any excuse or any bowing to these creatures that undergo stress and sometimes even intense pain in the hope that we create a more peaceful world. I will stop here almost, but I will, to give you just a little story which I find inspiring and helpful, is the story of the caterpillar. Some of you know what happens to a caterpillar. Of course, it's standing in place for the human species, very grabby, it eats all the time until it gets fat. And then what happens is the caterpillar itself, it's not some evil spider or so. The caterpillar itself starts to pupate or make itself into a larva. And the immune system, it's a total catastrophe for the caterpillar. Tries to avoid that, but somehow, of course, no chance. It will, and it's not that the eyes of the caterpillar become the eyes of the butterfly, but no, it's totally dissolves, it becomes a soup of molecules and cells, and then for the caterpillar, total catastrophe, and then it starts to organize itself anew, and lo and behold, at the other end, a butterfly comes out and flies away. So I think the caterpillar had no idea what it's doing, total catastrophe, but it has a totally unexpected outcome. So we should not be too worried about what happens in the world. Of course, we should do our best and contribute as good as we can. But we should not lose heart, even at the most ununderstandable or unacceptable things that are happening in this world. So at this point, I want to give the microphone to Julia, and she's a biologist and works for the Ärzte gegen German Association, Ärzte gegen Tierversuche, something like Doctors Against Animal Experimentation, and yeah, thank you very much. Excuse me, you can first ask me some question if you want to. Thank you. I'm afraid I missed out on all the beautiful murmurations because I didn't see them.
Hi. Oh, thank you for your talk. I'm over here. I know this conference is about psychedelics, and a lot of people don't necessarily equate cannabis as a psychedelic, but I was just wondering your thoughts about cannabis as a tool for enhancing mindfulness or meditation practice.
Well, the Indian sadhus and the Indian tradition, out of which Buddhism sprang, of course, knows a lot about it, and it's my personal little, indulgence. I like it. Yeah.
Yes, excuse me. I heard the name Felsentor. It's right.
Say again?
Felsentor.
Felsentor, yes.
You can speak a little bit about this place and what happens in this place.
Well, next year we have our 25th anniversary. Felsentor is a product basically of my restless mind, and as a starting point. But that's the quote that Peter said, everything starts with a thought. Actually, that's also the Pada Sampada is the oldest Buddhist work. It also starts out with, you should pay close attention to your thought, and then it progresses in a similar way. Felsentor is a more or less a Zen-inspired meditation place where there are seminars of all different kinds of things, and then it just happened that psychedelics somehow showed up, and if it moves into that direction, I will be very happy. That was Albert Hoffman's vision, that places like that should spring up again, where the culture and the knowledge and where people can go to have that kind of experience in a safe environment. So Felsentor is just very beautifully located and has nothing around it, and you have to walk there, you cannot just drive up, all things that are very helpful to spiritual practice.
Thank you very much.
Was about like experienced meditators taking psychedelics Can you talk a little bit more about beginning meditators or intermediate meditators and how psychedelics might help or hinder their meditation journey?
Well, as I said, the formal traditional meditation practices, probably with microdosing, that would be an interesting thing. But other than that, it doesn't really, my observation is, if you take a high dose of a psychedelic, which probably will produce a mystical experience, you have to forget about most of all the traditional ways how to sit or how to breathe, and so it takes over, it's stronger, with possible exceptions. But I think the meditation practice itself is an enormous help to be in the habit of being able to recognize your experience as to a good degree your own production, that you contribute a lot to what we create the world and the world creates us. But so to know and to be familiar with the fact that, which happens in meditation too, that you see all kinds of strange images, beautiful or frightening, and to recognize that is your own creation. And to remember that, or just to know that, your body knows that on a psychedelic journey, obviously has a very calming and strengthening effect. Everybody seems to agree that that's a good combination.
I have a question. Maybe it will not make sense, but I was wondering, we speak about meditation, and what about koans? Have you discovered any resonance between psychedelics and Zen koans practice?
Other than it's puzzling, or I'm from there's two different Zen schools. Basically, one worked mostly with koans, the Rinzai school, and my school or our school is shikantaza, just sitting. So I'm not so experienced with koans, but of course, the life koan we all drew on is unsolvable, and we have to solve it. So to remember that on a journey is probably helpful. Koans are sort of puzzles. Public cases is literally like a famous one. One is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or does a dog have Buddha nature? Things like that. And you have to sit with that, and you have to go to the master 3 times a day and give your understanding, and you cannot hear that question anymore, and you still have to keep at it. It's a method.
Vanja, thank you very much for your talk, but I just have a quick question. The first conference that ALPS had in Lausanne, we got to watch the movie from the study, and it was quite inspirational and really gave us a good idea. How in the years since that time, since that study, how have psychedelics been integrated, if they've been integrated at all, into practices that are happening at Felsentor? And is that, you mentioned that in several moments, that you would like to see that be something that is perhaps continues, and in terms of reintegration and integration into daily life, not so much the experience itself, but more the integration part. How is that continuing on?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, Felsentor, as many of these other communities, is an attempt to find a way how to live honestly and how to live in a community. We are so isolated, so communal living is a big challenge, as it's the third of the 3 jewels in Buddhism, Sangha. And we are all so determined to become independent, which of course has its qualities, no doubt, but it seems to be the highest goal to have your own car, your own washing machine, your own four walls, and not to depend on anybody. Well, that's not healthy, that's not, and it's not sustainable. So we experiment with how we could live together. And these substances can obviously have a very uniting effect. Similar if you sit together for a week and you suffer, and then the person next to you might not even know his or her name, but you get so familiar with that person. You know that person pretty well after a week of sitting together. Well, if you go together on a journey and you spend hours and moaning, and there's a connection made that which, again, that we have heard, it has to be then transformed into our life. The spiritual experience is no more, but also no less than an experience, and the goal is a spiritual life or an integrated life, and that's, as we heard, is a lifelong challenge. We have to do it till our last breath. And Felsentor is an attempt, trying, it's like a laboratory, you could say, to how could we possibly live together with a kind, encouraging, supporting attitude. Then we get all upset, of course, and then we are learning.